Well, cool. Hey, welcome everybody. We're going to jump in on another weekly real estate investor training session, and kind of take this to the next level. For those of you that are jumping in out on the social media land and joining us now for the first time, or maybe you've been joining us regularly, weekly, as we've been doing these. The idea behind this is, at FreedomSoft, our mission is to help make financial freedom through real estate investing simple and accessible to anyone. And that includes the team here at FreedomSoft. And so what I've been doing is taking the 20 plus years of real estate investing experience and the countless deals that I've done, and just breaking down process formulas, thought processes to teach the team how to take advantage of this thing we call real estate. And 20 some years ago, or maybe a little less than that, because I kind of screwed it up for 3 years, not really knowing what I was doing. But so let's call it 18 years ago, real estate changed my life. 20 plus years ago, I got the bug, and then it took me 3 years of trial and error without the right support, without the right education, without the right knowledge, just trying it on my own. And then I got educated. And once I got educated, within 45 days, everything changed. And that education, the whole piece about education is fantastic, but it's worthless without action. And so you got to take action. And I always talk to the team, and I've always talked to my kids about there's three things that are important: knowledge, relationships, and action. And if you can get the knowledge, if you can build the relationships, and if you take the action, you can get just about anything you want in life. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. Over the last few weeks, we have broken down the process of real estate investing, and it starts with a thought process. To invest in real estate successfully, you have to first know, why are you going to do it? Why are you investing in real estate? If you don't understand your why, you'll never get out of bed in the morning and actually go to work and do it. You'll never fit it on your lunch break or after work. You'll never do the things if you don't understand the why. And as a team, we've kind of talked about this offline, and it's the why isn't just make more money. The why is never just make more money. There's something bigger and deeper underneath the why that you've got to get to, the root, that will actually get you out of bed and make it happen. Outside of that, it won't happen. And so figure out your why. Once you figure out your why, the next thing you have to do is you have to figure out what is the definition of a deal for you, right? If you're a fix and flip investor and you want to make $20,000 or $30,000 cash, the definition of a deal is different than if you're a buy and hold investor and want to create cash flow. So the definition of the deal matters. And if you go back several weeks on these trainings, we talked a lot about the definition of the deal, the formulas to analyze it, and how to think through that whole process. So number one, your why. Why are you interested in real estate investing to begin with? Number two, what defines a deal for you? Once you've defined a deal, then you can go and you can say, where can I find that? Where and how can I find the type of property that is going to feed and lead into that kind of a deal? And so from there, what I want you to be thinking about is all of the stuff that goes into finding the geography, the neighborhood grades, all of the things that we've talked about. Next is the funding. If you can go find a deal, how are you going to fund the deal? And so talking about funding the deal, talking about private money, talking about owner financing, creative terms, cash price, all of those things. And then finally, it's all of the post-acquisition things, such as rehabbing and management and cash flowing and all of that stuff that happens in reselling, all of that stuff that happens on the backside of the transaction. And so as I was talking about these 5 major components, the team started to here at FreedomSoft ask me about an hour ago. We were wrapping up our Friday morning meeting and we were having a precursor discussion to this, and the team was asking me about some more specifics around paperwork or around the closing process or around private money and diving into some of those technical things a little bit more. One of the questions that came up in one of the discussions that we had in our Friday morning team meeting about an hour ago for probably 25 or 30 minutes, we talked about this stuff, was one of the team members lives in a high price market and wants to buy a property and wants to apply and use some of the techniques and the things that we've been talking about to go put their dream house together and build not an absentee owner investment cash flowing property or even a fix and flip, but how do you apply these things that we're talking about to your own personal family and life? And I can tell you guys, about 18 years ago, I used these techniques to buy a house that my family lived in for a long time. We lived there for 15 or 16 years. And I used owner financing and just understanding a seller's needs in order to produce a result that I wanted and acquire the house that I then lived in for a long time. And so we got onto the discussions, and the first question was, how do I apply these techniques to getting my own personal residence, getting my dream house? Because the thought process was that as an investor, this is what I said: if you understand the why behind the deal, and if you can define a deal, and this is what I told my team. I said, I buy for cash flow today. And so my definition of a deal is really simple. I want a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, brick or stick house, 1,000 square feet in a C neighborhood that rents for $800 a month or more cash flow, that has less than $15,000 in repairs, that I can cash flow net $250 a door. That's my definition of a deal. That's what I look for. Now, I'll vary from that a little bit here and there, but that's my definition of a deal. That's the deal I'm looking for. And when I can find that deal, I know very quickly that that's my buy. And so that seems pretty simple and pretty straightforward. As an investor, when it's all mathematical and it's all financial, it's pretty easy to just define the deal and then go and look for that, right? As a real estate investor, that's what we do. We go on the hunt for what we're looking for. So if you don't know what you're looking for, that becomes difficult. The comment was then made, well, what if I'm looking for my personal residence? How do I define this? And I don't know, Trevor, is Jonathan unmuted, or is can we talk?
Yeah, I mean, he just needs to unmute himself, and then.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Because I want to relive some of this conversation that we had, because I think some of the lessons are incredibly valuable to mindset, to thought process, to how you go about this entire approach to this thing called real estate investing. And so the comment was, it seems easy to define what a deal is if it's for investment purposes. Rob laid out his definition of a deal. We could all adopt that as our definition of a deal and go look for that exact same thing, or we could modify it and we could go look for the thing that we want. But when it's your personal residence, what is the criteria? How do you figure out how to apply these techniques to go put your personal residence together? And this was the starting point of the comment. And Jonathan, I'll let you jump in if you're willing to, and just comment about this in a second, because I think setting the framework to kind of revisit the conversation we had before would be super helpful for everybody. But this is what I said. When it comes to applying these techniques for and your own personal residence, it's more about, number one, identifying your dream house or the house you want to live in. What's the criteria of the house, the real estate, the property itself that you're looking for? And number two, how much are you willing to spend on a monthly basis to live there? That's it. That's your criteria. So how much are you willing to spend to live there? See, most of the time we think about investments and we don't think of it in the context of spending. We don't think of it in context of outgo. We think of it in the context of income. But when it's your personal residence, you have income coming from somewhere else into your life, and in your personal residence, that becomes an outgo. So the term in the deal, when you're looking for your personal residence, owner occupied house, and applying real estate thought process to this, or investment thought process, the term that is fixed, that you cannot deviate from, is how much are you willing to spend to occupy the house? Okay, so now if you're going to finance the property traditionally, you have a limit to the monthly payment that you want to pay the bank, right? That's basically, you're paying the bank for the right to occupy and own that property, right? So that's an outgo. The same thing can be applied if you're leasing a property or lease to own. If it's a personal residence, can you buy it on a lease with an option to buy? Okay, so the criteria is, how much am I willing to spend on that lease on a monthly basis? All other terms are negotiable. And number three, owner financing, the same exact thought process as the lease with the option to buy. The owner finance payment that you're going to spend is what? Is the outgo. How much are you willing to spend to occupy, to buy the occupancy of that house? Because that's what you're doing as an owner occupant. You're basically paying for the occupancy of that house. So Jonathan, that was me just kind of setting up some of the conversation that we had earlier. I'm trying to remember when we were just riffing after the team meeting, how we got into this discussion exactly. Maybe you remember. Do you want to share? I can't remember exactly how we got there.
Yeah, so a little bit of background. I've been Freedom Soft coming up on 3 years, and so I've heard the stories of Rob and how he's done things, and I've seen it, like in the last couple years. How he bought his Honda Ruckus and how he bought his hangar and everything else, and then I think for me it was just whether I'm looking for real estate investment for the financial freedom is one thing, but how do you go about it when looking, like you said, purchasing your primary residence of where you're going to live? And that's where that came up. And Rob started to walk me through, okay, well, the first is, what's your criteria for your house? And I think that, again, when he defined his criteria of, and I can probably say it almost word for word because I've heard it so many times, like this is his criteria. It's, 3 bedrooms, stick build, 1 bathroom. And I understand, and it took me a while, like, if I lived there, I wouldn't want to have 1 bathroom. I would want to have 2 for my family, right? Like that's the lens I was looking through. And so, but I realized like that's not the investment criteria. And there's a reason why he chooses the 1 bedroom, but that doesn't work for us in our family. And so that's what I realized is, first of all, my criteria is different. And it's different because it's not an investment. It's different because that's where we want to live. And how can we apply kind of the same principles? And so that's what started it. It's like, okay, that's how it works. And then the next thing is like, how much can you pay monthly? Like, how much do you currently pay? How much are you willing to pay, to live wherever you want to live? And from there, the market where that we're in is in Durango, Colorado, and it's very, the houses have exploded. It's a destination where people now want to live even more so, and the word's kind of gotten out over time. And we've seen a couple booms and busts since we've been here, but where it is now, houses have, gone up 20%, 30% in the last year alone. And I think one of the big things so here's your criteria. How much are you willing to pay monthly? Then what? And from there, the difference was, and I think it finally hit home today for me differently, is, okay, so now I have my criteria. Now I have how much we're willing to pay, but the bank doesn't care about my criteria. The bank doesn't care about how much I'm willing to pay per month. They have other criteria. And if that's a roadblock, how is that a roadblock? And then that's where it came up with is the bank has, I know how to buy a car, or let me say it a different way. I know how I've been trained, or the world in general or in mass, at least here in the United States, that there's a set process, right? Like you go through an agent, the agent, negotiates with the seller sells, you go to a bank, you get a loan, and those kinds of steps are so predetermined, and they seem so concrete until you make the step and believe that it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that was where the big light bulb came on for me. Again, even though I've heard it and I've heard it and I've heard it, everything else, like for investment side, it seemed like, okay, this is how you can do a deal for an investment. But when it's your own property or you're creating your own criteria of where you want to live, those things, like the bank doesn't have to be the only route. And I think that it was where, for me, it's like from there, how can you apply these kinds of strategies, as though you were an investor, even if you're going to be the one living there, you can still apply that, and you do not have to go, same thing with a car. Like you go to you go to the car dealership, you look at a car, you buy a car, they finance it. Like they do a background check. I mean, like it's very tried and true, which I would say is 99.9 something, how everybody does it. And
I think, Jonathan,
mean that it has to be the case.
I think that was the key, right? That the key piece that we talked about in leading up to this was the belief system, right? There's how the world teaches everybody that the process is done. And then there is how entrepreneurs, real estate investors, people that learn something different believe it can be done. And that was the difference, right? So it really got us on the discussion of terms of, okay, right, ignore the bank, right? The bank is not even a piece of the equation, right? So let's say you want to go out and buy $1 million house, okay? You're in a high price market. The house is $1 million. It's a perfect house for your family. And you look at that and you say, man, I don't really want to go put 20% down on $1 million house. I don't want to put $200,000 down to buy $1 million house, which is what the bank typically has you do. Maybe 15% down with a second, and all these things. You $150,000 to $200,000 down payment. Well, if we just ignore what traditional thinking is, and we say, how do we go get owner financing? How do we turn the seller into the bank and get rid of the bank from the equation entirely? All of a sudden now you're controlling the terms and the bank is not controlling the terms. You're controlling the terms of the financing of the bank because you can negotiate with the seller. So here's the thought process. When you're negotiating with a seller, whether for investment purposes or whether for owner occupancy purposes, this is one of the key things. You have to understand what your non-negotiable term is. And when it's an owner-occupied house, the non-negotiable term is how much are you willing to spend to occupy the house? Okay. If you know that, that sets the tone and the term for the payment that you're willing to pay the seller. So on $1 million house, let's just say that you're willing to spend $3,000 a month. Okay. $3,000 a month is the maximum that you're willing to say. And this is my made up number. It's not your number. It's just $3,000 a month. Let's use that number. And the reason I want to think about this is because a lot of times people think, well, why would a seller ever sell owner financing? Why would they do this? And the discussion, and I think Henry, you made the comment that to find this kind of a deal, this is where distress has to come into play. And I pushed back on that and I said, not necessarily. You don't need to have a distressed seller to get a seller to do owner financing. And there's a few reasons why. Number one, tax burden. Okay. If they sell for cash and it's absentee owned, let's assume they haven't lived there for a couple years where they're going to get favorable tax treatment. Let's say it's absentee owned. They sell for cash. Whatever their basis is and any equity that they have above that basis, they have to pay taxes on that. When you buy owner financing, you spread that out over time. And that matters because if you take all the cash, if the seller takes all the cash at one time, they have a big tax burden immediately, a big tax hit right away, and now they have less cash to invest. So the return on investment, if they don't take all the cash out and have a bigger portion that they leave in the deal as the seller, they're earning a return on more of that equity because they're leaving it in, not taking it out, and losing a portion of it immediately to taxes. Does that make sense? So that's a negotiation conversation, not even negotiation. That's an education conversation that you can educate a seller. Okay. Another thing is a seller doesn't have to be distressed because let's say they've got that $1 million house, and let's say they don't owe anything on it today. They own it free and clear. They've got plenty of money. They sold a business. They have their vacation house in Durango. They live in XYZ, San Francisco, Minneapolis, New York, wherever, and they own it free and clear. They don't have any debt on it. They've got plenty of cash, and that particular seller, I will tell you guys, that seller is always asking, what am I going to do with my cash? Where am I going to invest my cash? Where am I going to put my cash? And the answer to that question is oftentimes, I don't know, right? So if they just sell their house now, get $1 million out of it, now they have another $1 million that they have to figure out what to go do with. If they put it in the bank, they're going to get what, 0.7% interest if they're lucky, right? Put it in a bank in a savings account, they're going to get nothing on it. Take it out, put it in the stock market, they're going to do what? Well, people today are a little concerned about the high position of the stock market. What's going to happen next? Is it going to crash? Others might look at that and say, hey, if hyperinflation, hits, or inflation hits, or hyperinflation hits, maybe prices go up and that does good for us. But other people are concerned about it crashing and going down. So people are saying, I don't want to put my money in the stock market. I don't want to put my money in the bank because there's no return. So when you come in and you say, I tell you what, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, why don't you just leave your money, all that equity in the house? You'll save on the big tax burden right out of the gates. I'll pay you monthly. You'll create a cash flow, an annuity income stream off of and secured by the asset that you already know. You already know the house. It's secure. You know it. You like it. You bought it. Why don't we just leave your equity there and I'll pay you X dollars per month for the house? Now let's just do the math on this for a second. Okay, let's just take let's say that the fixed term is $3,000 a month. So you're going to pay the seller $3,000 a month times 12 months. That's $36,000 a year, right? $36,000 a year. And let's say that the seller let's say that it's $1 million house. Okay. And they've got $1 million in equity that if they took that money out, they could go invest that money. Okay. They could go invest that money, but they're going to get hit with taxes, aren't they? They're going to get, when they take that money out, if it's an absentee owned property, an investment property, a family property, an Airbnb, vacation property that they've gone to, whatever it is, they're going to get hit with taxes. Let's say that, they've got a business, maybe they own some other real estate, they've got some ability to reduce that tax burden. So let's just call it 25% tax hit. Okay. They might be in a higher tax bracket, but I'm going to assume that, they've got some money, they've got some wealth, they've got some knowledge. They've probably got some other tax reducers because they're smart. So let's just say that they're going to get hit with a 25% tax. So that $1 million becomes $750,000, right? That makes sense? So divide the 36,000 divided by 750,000, and the effective rate of return is 4.8%. 4.8%. Okay, it's 3.6% if they don't have to pay any taxes. 3.6. That's not huge return on their money, is it? It's not huge. But if you're going to put it in the bank at 0.7%, if you're going to put it in the stock market and you're concerned about the risk of losing it, and traditionally people tell you to if you can get a 6% return long term, 6% return is not a bad return, is what you hear out there in the world, right? And so the idea is a little bit lower return with the security of being invested in the house and the property that they already know worth the lower return. And oftentimes it is, because if they take the money out, they got to pay taxes, and then they got to figure out what to do with it. And if you take the money out, pay the taxes, and then go invest it somewhere else, you don't know the security of the investment that you're going into. Whereas you already know the security of the house that you already have lived in or vacationed in or have owned for a number of years, right? So that's the big conversation.
Yeah, and I think the other is for me to recognize, again, once terms, and you said it a couple weeks ago, and I think when somebody asked the question, what should you pay for this house? And your response was, I don't care what I pay for the house. I don't care. Like, that's not the thing that you get stuck on of like, how much is the house worth? Because and somebody said, well, what, would you offer 100,000 more for the house? Well, sure, that's no problem. And you said, well, it was something along the lines of like, yeah, if it was $1 million, if I paid $1.5 million, but my terms were something along the lines of, hey, I'll pay you, $1 a day or whatever. I mean, like to just draw the extreme, if I pay you $1 a day for the next 1.5 days, I'll do that deal every day, right? Because then you're getting the control of the asset, you're getting, everything else that you're looking for, and the terms are part of the deal. And to separate the terms is never how it should be done, right? Like the terms is where you can negotiate, and it's not just one. There's not just one term that you can negotiate on. Which again, that's where I felt like almost like a lemming, kind of just going through the process of, if you are only negotiating on the price, you're at such a disadvantage because it completely closes the door, and you're using the terms that the bank is using. And to also reiterate what you just said, I think like a level above that. And you just talked about how to solve their problem, right? So like you're helping to solve their problem. You figure out what their problem is, and you actually bring the problems if they don't see them. You say, well, this could be a problem. This could be a problem. and you help them to understand what the potential problems are through terms and, you know, the multiple number of terms that you can bring to the table, you can help to solve their problem and get what you want and get what they want. And you're helping to solve the problem with the creativeness using terms as, you know, and not getting the purchase price as the only, and again, that's following like the tried and true path compared to, hey, like once you bring terms into the discussion and you educate them about what terms are available to them, right? Because they, and I'm not saying everybody is, but I imagine a lot of people, when they sell a house, they do exactly what the bank tells them. They do what the agent tells them. And, you know, you just do the process. Because I grew up, you know, how my parents bought a house, how their parents bought a house, right? Like there was a very clear path. And I think when I heard it today, again, differently, because I do this, like when you have a car or you want to buy something that's a non-house, like I think that it hasn't been kind of drilled in society and in people that there's this one way to do it. And I think once I understood and kind of accepted, I felt like it was almost like the Matrix of like taking my blinders off and saying, hey, I don't have to go through this process. And again, I think it was helpful to understand, first of all, my criteria, how much am willing to pay, and everything else starts to become available, right? Like the terms really open up the floodgates, not just for me, right? Not just for me. And I think they do for me, but it also opens up any property potentially. And then it also opens it up for the seller to understand, hey, they have other options as well. And people who have been inside the real estate world understand this. And I think also, you know, the FreedomSoft users are using terms all the time, right? Because and they have, even with the criteria that Rob lists out, that's not where you stop either, right? Like that's where those are your criteria. And then you say, okay, well, here's my terms. And if you have, you know, 1,000 different ways to come up with and make a deal happen, that is where the power comes, I believe, right? Because you're paying attention to what's concrete, and it's not just the concrete, you know, the tunnel or like the concrete path that's been provided, right? That banks understand, and they just have kind of streamlined it to their favor in a lot of ways, right? They've taken the risk out for them by doing the things like 20% down,
right?
You know, different things.
And Jonathan, that's the key. That's the key, right? What you're talking about is the key. Is that once you figure out that you can control the terms and that nobody else is controlling the terms, you have full flexibility and freedom, right? You made a comment a minute ago, though, that I wanted to not forget. And you said people in real estate know this stuff. 99% of people in real estate do not know this stuff, okay? There's a small segment of people in real estate that know this stuff. And it's people that are around it, that pursue learning it, that want to, you know, add some knowledge around a creative real estate repertoire, or, you know, arrows in your quiver. Very few people, honestly, in the world know this stuff. But when you do know it, you have powerful tools at your disposal. So I'd love to hear those people that are, you know, chimed in and just online. If you guys have questions, hit some questions into the comments box, and we'll circle back and we'll answer them. Because we took this conversation a little bit further, Jonathan, as we talked earlier as well. And that was, okay, so you use the extreme of, I'll pay you $1 a year for, you know, or $1 a day for 1,000,000 days, right? Okay. What is a more realistic thing? Let's say you got $1 million house, and you know that you're negotiating the term that is not going to change is $3,000 a month. Okay. I don't care if it's $1,500 a month, $3,000 a month, $8,000 a month, whatever it is, right? If the term, if your outgo for your dream house or for your next house is $1,500 a month, you're probably not looking at $1 million house. You're looking at something a little bit lower in price. Probably doesn't mean you can't negotiate $1 million house for $1,500 a month, but that is a bigger stretch, right? You got to look at some reasonable framework, right? And so if $3,000 is your number and the price is $1 million, would you pay $2 million for that house? Okay. The term is price equals $2 million, payment equals $3,000 a month. What if the price is $1 million, payment is $3,000 a month? What if the price is $500,000, payment is $3,000 a month? See what never changes? The payment of $3,000 a month never changes, but the price can totally change. And why would you be willing to pay $2 million for $1 million house? I'll give you your price if you give me my terms.
Which right? I think, again, like I don't want to, that seems so simple when you say it, but I think that to me feels like a crux or like a fork in the road of choosing to go down the path of accepting that terms are available, plentiful, that people appreciate the terms. And again, I think it provides flexibility. It provides solutions to problems that traditional terms that are determined by a bank do not provide, right? Like that's where right. The bank doesn't always solve the problems with their terms. And again, right. I think that's the difference. But
and let's just take bank out of the equation. Bank doesn't even exist anymore. You don't want to go put $200,000 down on $1 million house. So bank's not even an option. So now what you've got to do is figure out how you're going to have the conversation to turn the seller into the bank, right? Go to every city in the country. Every city, I don't care if it's a small town in the middle of Wyoming, the nicest building in that city is the bank building. There's a reason the banks have all the nicest buildings, okay? And you want to turn your seller into the bank. And that's an easy conversation to do. And they don't have to be motivated or stressed or distressed in order to do it. They just have to see the benefit to them that we've already talked about. And you've got to have a conversation with them that helps them feel confident that, you know what, this is good. This makes sense to me. And I will tell you, I've sold properties owner financing, both as an investment and also as, gosh, this just solves my problem. Like I don't have to really think about it. And I like the income stream off of it. And, yada, yada, yada. There can be a number of reasons. So as a seller, I don't see an owner financing buyer come to me and say, oh, they must have bad credit and be bankrupt and have no money. Like that's not what goes through my head as a sophisticated seller. The more sophisticated your seller is, the more likely owner financing is something easy to put together. Let me say that again. The more sophisticated the seller is. So the seller living in $1 million house is more sophisticated probably than the seller that has a $90,000 rental property, potentially, not always. But there's probably some level of sophistication, right? And so it's easier to have that conversation because they're already thinking, does this solve my problem? So when I bought my hangar, I bought it with owner financing. And I solved, and you have to understand a couple things. So the seller was not, he was another businessman, owns an excavation company, has an airplane, moved his airplane to another location, had a a vacant hangar that he had rented out, and the tenant in there hadn't paid him. So he was going through the eviction process, and he was about to get this guy out, and then he was going to sell the hangar. You have to understand, hangars in this area are a 3 to 5 year waiting list just to rent a hangar. You get on the list, it's 3 to 5 years. The demand is really, really high. The demand is really, really high. So if he would have finished out the eviction, which he was already all the way almost through, and just put that hangar up for sale, he would have sold it pretty quick because there's tons of demand. Well, I got on the phone and talked to him before he got to the point of listing it for sale. And at the end of the day, he liked the income stream. He was a sophisticated guy, intelligent. And I asked him, I said, hey man, would you be interested in just being the bank on this thing? Said it would save me from writing a big check, and it would save me the hassle of, if I was going to finance it, of going and bank financing an airplane hangar. And he goes, what, like you just pay me monthly and over time? I said, exactly. I said, what'd you have it rented out for? And he told me the number, and I did quick math in the back of my head. I said, hey, let me punch some math on my calculator real quick. So I pulled my phone out and I ran some quick calculator math. I said, you know what? I think that number would work. So I said, let me ask you, if I could pay the same amount of money that you were getting in rent already, does that help you? He goes, man, that would be awesome. He goes, I love that idea. And long story short, I was intelligent enough to bring it up to him in a way that he understood it and he resonated with it. And then he says, so how does this work? And so the things that we've talked about in the past, guys, owner financing is not that different than private money, right? It's kind of the same thing. In either case, you're getting, in one case, you're taking a private individual and turning him into a lender. In this case, you're taking a seller and turning him into a lender. And so there's going to be a promissory note. They're going to secure their promissory note against the property. And if I stop paying, they get the property back, just like the bank. It's the exact same scenario. It's what the bank does. It's what a private lender does. It's what owner finance does. Okay. And so because I was knowledgeable, I said, well, here's how we do this. It's really simple. I'm just going to put a quick, I'm going to put the paperwork together. So I'm just going to send you a purchase agreement. And in that purchase agreement, it's just going to lay out the terms that we just talked about. And then when we close, we're going to have a promissory note that is going to spell out how I'm going to pay you, the price and the payments over time. And the title company that closes this is going to secure that loan against the asset. Does that work for you? He goes, man, that's perfect. I said, okay, so I will have you a purchase agreement in the next hour. Are you going to be around your computer? He said, yes, I will. I put the paperwork together. And basically it was a one-page purchase agreement that basically said, I'm going to pay this price at this interest rate with this payment over this period of time. And then the general other things that just come in a simple purchase agreement. Sent it over to him. I signed it. He signed it. And now guess what? Now I don't have to know anything else. I can go to title company and say, hey, can you help me get this thing closed? I have no idea what to do, right? The number one thing you want to do is get the purchase agreement signed with the terms that you want. Once you have that, everything else can be figured out by asking questions and by getting people that know how to do it, right? That's the key. Your job as a real estate investor or as a home buyer is to get it under contract with the terms that you want. That's it. If you can do that, everything else can be brought together and made to happen.
Right. And so then the next thing we went to is like, well, who would be, especially when we were talking about me, like in this area, who who would it be? How could we go and find that? And again, it's like, well, and I think you said it. Well, that's what FreedomSoft does. And I'm like, I know, but now it seems more straightforward. Like, I know what FreedomSoft does. I know how it works. I knew that, but I think it was just, again, the belief of real estate versus my own personal home, and like how those things are different and how to go find those people. First of all, and again, it's going through the list. Like, I don't want to just put an offer or, start a negotiation with the house I don't want to live in. Right. So first of all, it's kind of going down my criteria, how much I'm willing to pay. And then everything else is open, right? Like, it really opens up all of that. Like, I don't have to put artificial blockers in mentally. So it becomes down to like a belief system. Once those two things are locked in place and those two things don't change, now everything else is open, right? Like, I don't need to put on some artificial, whether it's, well, I'm going to have to come up with 20% down, and I'm going to have to follow this process of a bank and, an agent and like, and everything else. And then you even said too, like, well, there's a situation where the agent was involved, right? Because, and I think I said, well, what about if it's already, FreedomSoft helps to find properties before they get listed, and it really opens it up to everybody. But you can do vacant homes, people who it's their second home. It may make it easier. But even if it hits the listings, that doesn't mean it's over either, right? And you could actually do things to find ways to make even those deals happen.
Right.
It's not a foregone conclusion, because I think that's what I said. Hey, we just missed a property, and it was because it was on it was on Zillow or wherever, and it already went under contract. And then it's because my belief system changed. I guess is what I want to get back to. My belief system changed. Well, if I really wanted that house, I could, and I'm not saying we're going to do this, but we could, buy out and pay the agent their fee, right? Like, pay them their fee, so they're happy, pay come up with terms with the homeowner, have the terms work for them. And the person who already they already potentially closed with, we could find a way to pay them to leave, right? Like, it doesn't need to be these things that I think they're artificial in the end, right? Like, because it's a belief system. I either believe that they're concrete or I don't believe that they're concrete.
Right.
And once I don't believe that they're concrete, and it's a belief system, it's not just me believing it, right? It's a belief. And I think that's where it really changes.
And here's what I said as we talked about this earlier. You got to take the emotion out of it. You can't want a house so bad. I mean, if you want a house so bad, then you're going to have to pay whatever the seller wants you to pay. End of story, right? If you want it so bad that you just got to have it, then you're going to ask the seller, what do I have to do to make this happen? They're going to tell you, and you're going to do it.
Right.
If
you're on their terms.
Now you're on their terms. And what you want is,
right,
as long as your unmovable term, how much you're willing to pay on a monthly basis, stays, then you can be all up in their terms. Like, you can give them whatever terms they want as long as your control term stays rigid, right? And so how do you go find this deal, right? Jonathan, if I was in your area, I would do a couple things. I'd go into FreedomSoft, I'd go into Lead Finder, I'd search for the types of properties in the geography area that you're looking for, the number of bedroom, the number of bathroom. I would probably do owner occupied and absentee. And I might even, I would do some filters. I would do owner occupied, I'd do absentee, I would do absentee out of state. I would look at the vacants. And, you start from a big wide list and you get narrower and narrower and narrower, but there's opportunity in all of it. And then you decide, which one am I going to start with? Now, another one you can do is you can go to Zillow. You could go to Airbnb, right? Go to Airbnb and make a list of all of the Airbnb properties that meet your criteria and put them on a spreadsheet and get the address written down for every single one. Street address, city, state, zip, like, write them down. Airbnb doesn't let you contact the seller, the owner directly. So what you got to do is you got to go and build your list. Airbnb, build your list, upload it into a list in FreedomSoft, click the find the owner button. FreedomSoft is going to look at the address. It's going to go append the owner's information to the record, to the list record inside FreedomSoft, and then skip trace that owner or send them direct mail. Like, it's all like button clicks inside of FreedomSoft. You just have to have the knowledge to say, okay, where do I start? Right? Go to all the for rents in Zillow. Do the same thing. Go to all the Airbnbs and do the same thing. Go build your list in Lead Finder and do the same thing. That's the process, right? And then it's marketing out, and then they reply back. And here's the key. You don't start the conversation with the seller to say, would you take $3,000 a month? That's not how you that's not how you get into that conversation of a terms deal. You ask this question, and there's a whole kind of framework for how you build value and how you do a seller negotiation or conversation. But you start with, hey, listen, man, if I paid you cash for this property in the next 30 days, what would you sell me the house for? Right? And this is obviously, you built some rapport, you got the conversation, you understand why they're selling. Like, what they're selling matters only because you want to live there and or it meets your investment criteria. Why they're selling is what the entire conversation needs to be around. Why are they selling? Because you have to solve their problem, their why, with your terms. But you have to start with, say, what are you asking for the house? What are you asking? And then what are you, if I paid cash, what's the least you would sell me the house for? And then by solving their problem, you transition them to, well, I'll tell you what, I think I can get closer, if not your price. But let me ask you a question. Would you be willing to take some payments over time? And then you get into the discussion of that. But now the seller doesn't see you as as a terms only person just looking for owner financing. You've got to have the full gamut of conversation, even if you don't really want to go that direction. What happens if you ask the seller, what are you asking? $1 million. What if they come back and say, after you ask them, if I paid you cash in the next 30 days, what's the least you'd sell me the house for? What if they said, well, if you paid me cash, I want $1 million, but if you paid me cash in 30 days, I'd take $400,000, because they have some need that they need that cash for really, really bad. What if they said $400,000? Well, guess what? If it's $1 million house and Jonathan, that seller, says that for $400,000, I'll tell you what, you get it under contract, call me and we'll go make a whole bunch of money, right? So you've got to go through the process of asking the questions and see what the seller says, right? And then after, because if they say, well, I wouldn't sell it for less than $1 million. Okay, there's two things. What do you want? $1 million. What would you sell it to me for? $1 million, or maybe 400,000. And then, well, let me ask you this. Would you take payments over time? And you want to get into that conversation, because now it's option A or option B. It's not just, here's my offer. It's, here are two options, offers on the table, what works best for you. Well, I'll tell you what, if I was going to take payments over time, I probably wouldn't sell it for less than $1 million. If I was going to do, or $1.5 million, if I was going to do owner financing, I'd want a bit of a premium on the price. Okay, we can have that conversation, right? So if I'm going to pay a little bit of a premium on the price, Mr. Seller, I think, Mrs. Seller, I think, a great place to be would be about $3,000 a month. I'm okay with the $1.5 million, but would you be okay with $3,000 a month? You're going to get a premium on the equity and the price. I'm going to get a fair, maybe premium on the payment, right? Premium meaning lower than what $1.5 million house payment might typically be with traditional financing. So in negotiation, you always give it. There's the give and get theory, right? If you give something, always get something. And that's generally where good negotiation happens. If a seller wants something, you can give the seller something. And Mr. Seller, if I can give you this, can I get this? And it's a reciprocal give and get relationship. You're both getting and giving. If I give you that, can I get this? If you get this, can I get that? Does that make sense? So that's kind of how that conversation should go. Let me do this. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I was just going to say that the difference in that whole scenario is, one, I'll go back to the belief that it's possible, right? And then two, you do provide them two options, right? And I think that's key to them, that they don't, again, because you're helping to understand where they are by asking specific questions. And I think that, and I've gone through the one calls close, and I know what that looks like. And it was always amazing to me. Like, you really think you could close on one? And the answer is, well, I've done it. So the answer is yes, I know I can do it. And so I am going to go back and revisit that to kind of understand what those questions are. And it's also important, like, sequentially, right? Like the relationship, the understanding, and so there's a sequence that helps it to get closed and get to that point, as opposed to, hey, I would like to come at terms. And like, you're not trying to dictate, you're trying to understand and then help to solve that problem. And again, I have, with this, I would have my criteria. I would have what I'm willing to pay. And like, those are my criteria that, that they're going to uncover in the process, but it's not something that has to be so cemented. Every deal is going to go the same way. And that's what I realized too, is even people who have been doing real estate investing, they may have one tried and true path, and they always focus on these one or two terms, and they are limiting themselves, right? As opposed to, somebody who understands terms from the beginning is like, or for the first time is like, okay, now I'm going to, I have these two or three things. But that's where like the education and the real estate sophistication and like the understanding become better. A real estate investor is knowing how to mix and match the terms. First of all, that there's more than one. I don't know what the number is, but there's some number of, and I'm sure it's kind of undetermined because it's always growing, right? Depending on, terms can be recreated and mixed and matched, and it becomes like a new vehicle for the deal getting done. And that's how the terms work is, and the more terms, in terms, I think is almost like too generic of a term, is that there's multiple ways to get a deal done, and you can mix and match them to solve their problem, whatever that may be.
That's the key.
Again, it was right. I was smiling too. Like, once I realized again, and
that's the whole key. Understand what your root term is, your unmovable term, and then negotiate everything else around it to solve the seller's problem or to give the seller what they want. Henry.
So in this situation, you have two sides. You have the side that Jonathan's looking to buy a house to live in, and then the real estate investment side of things. If you get your terms at $3,000, in your situation, you're going to turn around, you're probably going to rent it out for $3,500, something like that, or $32,500 if you're going to take your bare minimum that you said you want $250 in cash flow at a minimum. But
if my payment is $3,000 and I'm on an $800,000 $1 million house, that's very different than a $75,000 house. My minimum cash flow is going to be significantly different.
Yeah, exactly.
And your expenses are going to be significantly higher.
But in this scenario, let's just say you had to pay a premium on both, whether you were going to plan on renting it out or if Jonathan's going to live in it.
Yep.
With the side of renting it out, that doesn't affect you whatsoever, right? You don't even think about that because you're still going to rent it out and you're going to get X amount in margin, even if you're still paying $3,000 a month. Even if you agreed on some crazy price premium,
yep,
where the seller said, I want $1.5 million instead of $1 million.
Yeah, exactly. I don't care what the price is.
Yeah. But in this scenario, even if Jonathan's going to live in it or you're going to rent it out, eventually, are you hoping that the value of the house increases to where you wouldn't have to offset that $1 million to $1.5 million? I guess that's what I'm hung up on.
Yeah. So
especially for Jonathan's example, when he's got to live in it and he's going to be in there for a long time.
And so the question is, what do we care what the equity does over time? We care what the equity does over time, but you know what's going to probably happen in Jonathan's scenario? There's going to come a time when that seller is going to come to him and say, hey, would you mind cashing me out? I would like, you don't have any obligation because you negotiated the term up front. You don't have to cash them out. You can just keep making the payments, right? And as long as you're not in default, they have to just keep accepting the payments. There's going to come a time that the seller has some opportunity or they're just sick of getting the payments. They want to do something else. And they're going to call Jonathan and they're going to say, hey, would you consider cashing us out? Do you think you could refinance the house and cash us out? And Jonathan's response is going to be, I probably can. I don't know that I can do it at the price of the note because I'm not sure whether the market supports that. I'm not sure whether we could get it appraised for that. I'm not sure whether that would make sense to me to do. Maybe interest rates are higher, right? So there would be things to look at and consider as to, yes, I probably can. Does it make sense for me? And you then probably get into a discussion of renegotiating the price at that time.
So at that situation, you're in the driver's seat now because now they're at some sort of level of distress because they want to get out.
Well, and they may not even be in distress.
Yeah.
They just may want to get out.
Yeah.
And again, I've been seller of owner financing, and I didn't do it because I was distressed. I did it because it solved my problem. There's been times where I've gotten cashed out and I've taken a haircut. I still walked away fantastic, but I made the deal work for everybody. So it's always about creating a win-win. Like, does everybody kind of get what they want or need out of the scenario? But just knowing that the reason price doesn't matter. Like, look, I'm an investor. If I can buy it into equity with terms, that's even better, right? But I don't care about the price if my terms are fantastic. If I can live in the house and occupy it, or if I have fantastic cash flow, if my objective is buying for cash flow, then price and the other things don't matter. That's how I look at it.
And I would say that that's a pretty big deal because, again, it goes back to the negotiation and terms and everything else, where terms today, it sounds so simple, and it is. Once again, you believe that it's like, well, the terms don't have to be fixed in stone for the next 1,000 years. They can be readjusted, right? But like the initial terms are what they are, and then you can readjust the terms later if and when, whether I bring it to the seller or I bring it to them or they bring it to me, and you have a rediscussion. You have a new discussion and figuring out like what's their problem, where are they? Right. Do I have a problem? Like maybe I want to only pay $2,500 a month as opposed to $3,000 or whatever that is, and then I could go and renegotiate that. It doesn't have to be something that's once it's done, you're living with that until you're in the grave kind of thing. It's always open for discussion from
That's
where
right.
we currently are.
I think this is a key. This is a key piece. In order to renegotiate the terms, you both have to agree on it. So you have to negotiate the terms up front with terms that you're willing to live with for the entirety of the deal. But also know that later, if something changes on your end or their end, you can have a discussion. You're just two human beings having a discussion. Hey, this is my problem. I think I can solve it this way. Would you be amenable to this? And even if that term is only for a period of time, hey, XYZ happened, it's always negotiable, but I always negotiate a term that I'm willing to live with for the entirety of the deal. And then later, if the terms get renegotiated or rediscussed for some benefit on either party's side, that can always happen. Trevor, you got a question?
Oh yeah, I was just, so is it more? It's more the terms that put you in the driver's seat, right? Like it's not whatever situation you or the other person finds himself in. When you're down the line, it's you get yourself into the driver's seat by getting the right terms.
Well, there's no on a renegotiation, neither party is necessarily in the driver's seat. It's just a discussion.
Yeah.
Right. You've negotiated your terms, and they're locked in. They're papered. They're penciled. They're signed. They're agreed upon. If the seller later wants you to cash them out, you don't have any obligation to cash them out. You could say no. Mm-hmm. But you might consider saying yes, but if you give the cash out, you get a reduction on price. Okay. So that's where the give to get thing comes into play. Neither party has to agree to a renegotiation, but it happens all the time with owner financing. But it doesn't have to happen, right? Yeah. Mike, do we have any questions?
Just a couple that came in. We got a shout out from Maui, so that's fun. And then let's see. Jim asked, "Do you do value-based loans?"
So the question is, do we do value-based loans? Or I think the question is, do we lend hard money? If I think that's the question, an asset-based loan. No, not as a general business. If I lend, I'm typically looking for an operator, an investor, somebody that I know and have a relationship with, and I will lend that way. But we're not in the business of lending. What else we got, Mike?
Let's see, Jim. I didn't fully understand this one. He said, "Where to get VAR loans, no money out of pocket." I don't know if VAR is short or something.
Variable?
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's a wrap.
Man, I'm stumped. I'm totally stumped. The first time somebody stumped me on a real estate question. But good job, Jim. We appreciate you stumping me. I'm not sure that I understand the question. Okay, awesome. Well, cool, guys. I think this has been a great conversation. I'd love to, as you guys watch this on a replay or dive into it, and if you have questions, just interact in the comments below, and we'll kind of watch it and answer any questions as it goes. But that's a wrap for this week, guys. This was a fun one. I enjoyed.
Super helpful.
Yeah, I enjoyed not just having to teach the same thing I've been teaching for 20 years, but to get into real world scenarios and like give framework for practically how to approach some of these questions. So that's a lot of fun. And with that, we'll see you guys next time.